So, I'm going to turn to this panel of very eminent journalists and academics, authors, public intellectuals, poets even, and to kind of start with a very kind of broad question. How do you see the world right now? And this is a very open-ended, broad question. Feel free to jump right in, whoever's feeling the first response. Jonas?
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. It's my very first time in India, so I can go back to my home country, Nigeria, and boast about everything that I saw here. With regard to this question, we're experiencing quite a difficult time in the Sahel region, especially within the context of West Africa. So in Nigeria, for instance, our last coup d'etat took place 31 years ago. And in many ways, it feels like we have outgrown it. So going back 30, 40 years, the idea of military dictatorship, I mean, it was pretty much bog standard almost across most of the countries in that region. And then slowly there was this movement towards democracy. It became desirable. And what's happened more recently is this shift where so many of the countries in that region are experiencing coups d'etats, military takeovers, and the reasons are all there. It has a lot to do with poverty and the fact that people are not enjoying the so-called dividends of democracy, where it's hard to find justice. There's huge insecurity, especially in the northern parts of those regions of the countries on the West African coast. There's huge employment, and we have a huge youth population who are disillusioned. And I think that maybe my generation has failed in some respect to fully transmit just how dangerous those the military dictatorships were. And as a result, you have all these swathes of young people who are almost saying, yes, that's what we want. So have we perhaps failed to be there as individuals who remind them and who show them the difference between what the world was, what our world was when we were living in a military dictatorship and what it is now living towards an aspiring democracy.
Right. And let me turn to both Jesus and Jonas. In Europe, of course, there's been a long kind of contested process and kind of historically switching between democracy and dictatorship and the tendencies that you see now toward authoritarianism. Jonas, do you want to go first, just kind of telling us how you see the world now, maybe focusing on Europe, Germany?
Yeah, I mean, I have kind of a split perspective because I grew up in Switzerland and I do live in Germany since 25 years and I have both passports. And I would say there is an interesting difference between Switzerland and Germany, because in Switzerland we've almost invented modern European populism. The far right-wing party in Switzerland is the strongest party with about 29% of the votes since 25 years. But nothing changes, and that's because we have this system where not one party is ruling. We always have like 4 parties governing together, so they are kind of contained. And also Swiss nationalism, which is very strong, is a completely different kind of German nationalism, because it's a nationalism thinking more about isolating the country more and more. And it has not a single expansive movement, except when it comes to trade. Swiss people want to make good business with everybody, of course.
Chocolate.
But otherwise, shut down the country, don't let people in, don't get close to the EU, which is like a tragedy right now. I mean, Switzerland should really be part of the EU, but they will not be. And in Germany, it's a completely different and much more scarier situation, especially this year, because it's a year of elections, not on the national level, but on state level. We have several elections. And probably in the eastern part of Germany, we have to be afraid that maybe it's at least a possibility that it will be the first time the leader of the state will be from the AfD, it's called the Alternative for Germany. It's a really far right party. I mean, they're considered, even in Germany, by the security forces, they're considered as fascistic, and so it's kind of, and if they have, I mean, they're sitting in all the regional parliaments, and they're sitting in the national parliament right now. But they're very contained by the other parties. But when they are ruling, a lot will change, and that's kind of frightening.
Yeah, and with Spain, obviously more than 30 years of a dictatorship that ended with what you have is a constitutional monarchy, right? What is it inside Spain? How is Spain looking at the world right now? How does its own history kind of, influence the way people think?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Well, I'm Spanish. I live in a very integrated European country, but through 40 years in the past century, have a terrible dictatorship, which came to the country by by a different path than rather very different than in Germany or Italy. Like Germany and Italy, Italy mostly, they elected the fascism in elections. I mean, they made Mussolini. He won several elections. In Germany, they had a good supporter, a very strong support of Hitler to go into the power. But Spain, none. I mean, Spain, when the civil war started, the fascist party has 0 parliaments. So it was imposed violently by several powers, and that has to say that in the past century and this century, it wasn't in the nature of the country to be an authoritarian regime. And when democracy came, it all went through quite good, quite natural. So we had a 50 years liberty regime, and we were good. So now we're in shock because of what's happening around the world, and trying to remember what happened and what led us there. And I think what is for sure is that we had an education problem in order not to tell our children or not to educate our children in the horrors of the dictatorship, and we will have to reinforce the educational program in order to put democracy into the right thing to do. I mean, because democracy, we mustn't forget, is quite an exception. It's a parenthesis through history. It's a modern thing. It's a very very recent thing, and we don't have to forget. That's why it's fragile. It's not. It's very new, and we have to fight for it because we have shown that is the way to do things right.
Yeah, those are very interesting perspectives. But on the education point, and Lola, you mentioned sort of all of these factors that make strong leaders popular. How much do they have to do with financial economic insecurity, with the lack of education, that colliding with the charisma of leaders in order to make them popular, make them sustain their power and their control. Like if populations of different countries were more educated, if a government was able to provide more basic necessities for them, would we have room for people to exert absolute control and to be brought to power or to bring themselves to power?
Can I start with this? Because
Sure,
I have
yeah.
a clear point. Well, the economic crisis is the reason. I mean, in the 30s, that was the reason for the crack of the 29th, that made such a huge impact over the world, that this poverty and inequality led the people to trust into authoritarian leaderships like Hitler, like Mussolini. Okay, so that was the point was that crisis. Nowadays, it's the same. We're repeating the same parenthesis, the same thing. It was a crisis in the beginning of 28 that led to this process in Europe. I was brought up in a mental mind of integration. So we came to democracy, Franco Day, when I was 10, and I had a kind of mental integration state in wanted to be European, wanted to get into Europe, wanted into democratic countries. And now what we found with this equality process and poverty process, we not poverty because we're not that poor, but it is a disintegration progress of what was built. So it's the other way around. And through this disintegration progress is where the fascist politics are trying to feed themselves to get into power. It's a kind of mental state that goes integration and disintegration progress.
I might jump in. I'm sure you're right in a way, and it's one reason is economic hardship.
Yeah.
But I think we have to be careful not to search for just one cause.
Yeah. No.
Because there are many, and especially.
No, but what I said, this is very important cause.
It is very important. But I mean, Switzerland is a good example for having a lot of right-wing populists. It's hugely racistic, and we have all those problems. And people want to have like strong leaders, and it's a really, really rich country with almost no poor people.
It is. Yes.
I mean, there it's more like the populists, they do work with something else. They say you might have a lot now, but they are coming to get it. So if you have a lot, you have a lot to lose.
So fear.
Yeah.
Fear
Is the factor. I think in West Africa, there is also a rather unique situation. And when you look at the countries where these coups have taken place, you'll find that a lot of them were colonized by the French. There's a substantial French presence in these countries, and there is also the extraction of minerals, which is taking place, which is happening in a way that is just blatantly unfair. So when you're looking at uranium or some of these rare earth minerals, you'll find that when they're taken out of the ground in West Africa, they're bought by Europe for a particular price. When the same minerals are bought from Canada, the price is totally different. So this inequality, I think, also plays a role. People just beginning to understand that it's as if they're being treated differently and being exploited. So in terms of what has brought about the rise, that's definitely something to factor in West Africa.
And I think that's true for pretty much a connected world, which brings me, Jonas, to the benefits of technology. I think what Lola was saying, this idea, this knowledge that you have uranium, for instance, being sold, the growing sense of inequality that people feel, and they see this mirrored in other countries, and technology and social media have a lot to do with allowing that information to spread globally so they can play a very positive role, I think, in creating more knowledge. At the same time, and I know this is something you've focused on, just the challenges and the dominance of technology and its ability and the people who are behind them, behind these technologies and AI increasingly to kind of fix the way we think and to kind of decide that like they can address the messy process of establishing democratic consensus and that they have all the answers. So I mean, tell me a bit more about both the benefits and the dangers.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm kind of pessimistic about the benefits. I mean, this is the old Silicon Valley narrative that the internet will be like the huge democratization machine and everybody will be the same because they all are connected in the same network. And this narrative has proven wrong quite a long time ago. And the interesting thing is that the people who transported that narrative, they are not anymore important in the Silicon Valley. And there are people like Peter Thiel. He already spoke about democracy not being able to govern the right way and that he is not a Democrat and stuff like this already like 15 years ago. So they were kind of just waiting for getting into the void, this kind of disappointed Silicon Valley narrative left for them. And I think they really took their chance to go into this kind of a vacuum of a narrative. And now we have this people with an immense power. I mean, J.D. Vance was made by Peter Thiel. I mean, I think Peter Thiel is kind of in the middle of the whole thing. I wrote about him in a novel called Kraft, which was published in 2017 and takes place in the Silicon Valley. He's not called Peter Thiel in my novel. I gave him another name, but I kind of used him as a template. And I think he's kind of in the center because he has this power over J.D. Vance, but he also has Palantir, the company. And Palantir is kind of, that's like the biggest nightmare I have. Like this big data AI company who not just works and gets a lot of money from the state. The idea of Palantir is to get rid of the state and be the state. And this is something which frightens me a lot. And it's even more frightening when you think about possibilities of AI and you have those like, I mean, it's so costly to further develop those large language models that in the end there will be probably 2 or 3 companies doing the race. And then you have those models and they're creeping in every crack of our everyday life and they're really important and they're just governed by 2 or 3 people or 2 or 3 companies.
Yeah, and that's kind of scary.
It's really scary.
Extremely.
If you take a look at the rank of the most powerful companies in the world, at least 5 of the 5 first, they are technologies. So that's power. And that says all. I mean, they built a tool that want to in which they can win money, earn a lot of money, and now that they have the money, they want to control some other things.
Right, and it's the control, and I think the idea of digital dictatorship that Jonas that you've raised is very much part of that. But we've touched on Thiel and we've touched on J.D. Vance, and we're hovering very close to, I think, someone who is very central to this argument, Trump. But I will come to him. Before that, I do want to ask about the suppression of art and culture and media that happens under dictatorships, under authoritarian tendencies. Again, tech plays a role into it now because the internet is something that you can shut down very quickly to prevent movements from spreading. But historically and in present day and in all of your contexts, what happens? Like, how does art and culture get suppressed, and how does art and culture, especially things that are underground, act as kind of records and create memories of things that we don't want to go back to?
In their agenda is the first thing, in the fascist, modern fascist agenda, is the first thing they point at. In Spain, for example, we were surprised because they get into power in these regions or cities. The first thing they asked was for the culture section because they give an extra importance to the culture section that other parties didn't give. So the supposed democratic parties didn't give much importance to the culture section, and they didn't give money, and they did. But this fascist country, these fascist parties, the first thing they asked for was for that. Why? Because they gave them enough, such a huge importance, because they want to forbid it. They gave it such an importance that that's the first thing they have to to forbid. And that's very clear. It's in the first part of the agenda. And we see it in a global strategy because they all have a global strategy. They're all reunited and they are united in this. And they give this importance to the cultural war. So we have to be very aware of that, and we have to establish and we have to fight for this kind of spaces of dialogue, like Kerala literature, first of all, which is an example.
In Nigeria, for instance, when we had all those military dictatorships, the first thing that goes actually is literature. Yeah. And that's because of literature's power to document and to spread information. And they also, in dictatorships, you'll find that they also attack intellectuals. So what happened in Nigeria was that all the publishers left. They hounded the writers. They closed down the publishing houses. Many of them, I mean, we had Oxford University Press, name it, in Nigeria. And they all, one after the other, just exited the country. So what happens? You have this barren land where the joy of culture is taken out. The memory of some of the material that is documented is destroyed. And this inevitably has a terrible impact on the psyche of the people. What they're seeing suddenly becomes their only reality. And that, I think, supports dictatorships. And that's why it's so important to get rid of culture, of the arts, of anything that allows people to have a sense of freedom and to tell their truths.
Just one example of the past dictatorship we had in Spain in the 36, okay? So with Franco. I'm sure if I say a name, you mostly know who I'm talking about. Federico García Lorca. You know García Lorca. Okay. The coup d'etat was the 18th of July. In the 5th of August, he was killed. So the first thing they do was kill the most extraordinary poet we had in Spain. First thing, they went after him and killed him. So that's how they act.
Yeah, we have a kind of a interesting fear in Germany because we have a really nice thing in Germany and Switzerland and Austria and other European countries that culture is highly subsidized by the state. So there is, especially in Germany, a lot of public money flowing into theater. Theater is really important. It's beautiful. And right now, most of the theater people, like probably all of them, are kind of the right kind of people, yeah. But the problem is The second, when right-wing parties take over, they have to decide to whom this money goes. So they have a lot of money to produce their kind of more propaganda theater and to really hurt the cultural scene. It goes very quickly. We could have seen it probably in Orban's Hungary, how he did it. He just changed all the theater directors, the museums directors, and literature is actually not that vulnerable to that. Of course, all the literary festivals, they are subsidized, but publishing houses, they are not dependent on that money. They are kind of a free market thing. So it's harder for them to go after publishing houses and writers.
But they can ban books. We've seen that in developed countries.
That's what they do in the US right now. I mean, hundreds, thousands of books actually now, for at least for libraries. Not,
especially the ones that talk about history.
About history,
Right.
about
There's-
poverty,
About inequality.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, just to weigh in on what's happening in India, I think there are a lot of challenges and similarities in terms of what you're saying. Given the rise of Hindu nationalism and some of these efforts to promote Hindu culture, to use state institutions to do some of that. And, for various reasons, you also have books or versions of books that are not the same in India as you might get elsewhere, and that is because of political sensitivities of the current government. So I think these tendencies do exist in various forms and to various degrees in any country that tends toward authoritarianism, and then kind of, the far end of it, which is a complete dictatorship. Lola, this is something we touched on briefly too, and it's for all of you actually. We talk about, when we think about dictators, when we talk about authoritarianism, it's usually, at least in my mind, it's something that's gendered almost as we think about male dictators, but there is, a long line of female authoritarian leaders, who operate very well under kind of strict control, whether you look at Bangladesh and Sheikh Hasina, the former prime minister of, and then also Marine Le Pen, you see around the world. So tell me if there is kind of differences between male and female authoritarian leadership, or does gender not matter when you're in that position of power?
So I think I'm not sure that it's a fair approach because corruption through power is very much an equal opportunities thing. And I think that this question also arises from a place where women are held to a higher standard than men, which I also don't think is completely fair. But in terms of how people get corrupted by power, I think it's probably down to personality. It's as opposed to being about gender. That's the best way that I can look at this particular issue.
What about you, Zeus? What about you, Jonas? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, we had before we had a no, we treat this ironically in terms that there is no gender problem in terms of authoritarian leadership like we have in Europe. We have Meloni, we have Le Pen, and we have this German girl. Well, how is it called?
Alice Weidel.
Alice Weidel. So no gender problem there, and the thing is that I was thinking when you talk about the corruption of power, now we're living, we have to change our minds completely in terms of how we react, how could we react, and how we can talk about this terrible wind of fascism. And the first thing we have to do maybe is call it fascism, because it is. We're just losing a lot of time trying to define what it is. And call it authoritarianism, populism. No, we have a proper word. We have a very direct word that was invented in Italy called fascism. It works, and now everybody knows what it is. Trump is a fascist. We have to say it loud and clear. And it's not, he hasn't been corrupted by power. It's even more dangerous because power in the United States, political power in the United States, it was a kind of democracy kind of paradigm. It's power who has been corrupted by this man and who is corrupted by this man. It's the other way through. It's not the power corrupted Trump. It's Trump corrupting power in his country. That's why we have to change a mental state of things. And we are now in a state of shock. We don't understand. And in Jaipur Festival, for example, I heard Anna Applebaum. And she said, for example, I don't use the word West anymore. Because West, in the terms of human rights, for example, is losing its whole concept. So we have to change it all through in order to fight them with the same language. For example, we have to, for example, our political leaders, they have this kind of kindness, correctness, no correction. They understand another language. The language, for example, the governor of California is fighting for, this Minnesota thing, it's a brutal language, but it's the only way they understand. So we have to switch off a little bit in order to react.
Do you agree with that? The idea that
I might go back to the gender question because
Sure.
I actually believe that the gender question is important because if you watch the rise of authoritarianism and right-wing populism, it always comes, and that's not unimportant, with a certain concept of masculinity, an old concept of masculinity coming back, like being strong, being clear, not agreeing that you're maybe mistaken, even in the bodily appearance, like Putin riding on the horse without a shirt on, all this stuff.
or
And the
Bezos from the tech dictatorship perspective, Jeff Bezos.
Yes, yes. And that is actually something, and it goes together with a backlash in women's rights, in gay rights and stuff like this. So this is something we have to watch really clearly because it's a backlash and it's dangerous and it's a form of masculinity I'm afraid of and I don't want to. And then it comes to your what you said, that we have to somehow adopt their language, but that means to become like a rude man and to adopt this masculinity in a way. And I hesitate to do that. I mean, there was this saying by Michelle Obama.
When they go low.
We go high, yeah. I mean, it's nice.
In principle.
In principle. But it's not just nice in principle. Maybe it's kind of cheesy how she put it, but there's something that there is a lot of truth in it. I don't think we can fight fascism by becoming fascists, you know? I mean, that's not what you suggested, but there is a certain danger in it when we start forbidding certain political parties because we think they're fascist. We have to do it. In Germany, actually, we're talking about banning the AfD. But this is like, if we have to do it, if it's a necessity, I can see it, but it's like really the last resort. That's like really, really a hard thing to do, and it must be a hard thing to do. So sometimes I think maybe the right way is we are not proud enough of what we achieved in the last few decades. And we have to say, no, there is actually another world possible in which we are not manly and not rude and and we can be soft and take care of each other.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't forget that
Yeah,
too easily.
This is very important. This idea, I suppose, of human decency. Yes. You know, and
We are in a decency crisis.
yes, we're post-decency world, I think, and which
Post norms, post decency.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true, but
But what I'm referring to is a language problem. I mean, we have to speak out loud. We have to be proud of what we achieve and talk it clearly, but proud and loud, not rude,
not civil.
but proud,
Yeah.
clear and loud. That's how they speak, clear and loud and proud of what they seem to represent. We have to we represent the good. And we have to say it. It's the good, and there are leaderships. There are women leaderships who represent that. I want to bring an example that Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico. I think she's making a great job, putting things very clear, so gently, but clear and out loud.
Yeah.
Claudia Sheinbaum is an example of this strong woman in power. Look, imagine Mexico,
Right.
the macho man world of Mexico, ruled by a woman,
Right.
which talk about these things: democracy, representative equality, in indigenous movements, all this very very clear.
That definitely is one example, but responding to the idea that you all raised in some form about decency, about the collective we having to stand up. I mean, it's a diffuse concept, right? The we versus when you look at someone who is in power, someone who holds power, someone who is autocratic, someone who is a dictator or has those tendencies. These are very specific people with cults of personality who, again, something we touched on about the idea of charisma, about the idea of having appeal. So when we say we're going up against individuals who have these cults of personality. How do you address that? Lola.
I mean, before I address that, I just want to say that clear, loud, and proud is good. And I do tend to feel that ultimately there are more decent people in the world than those who are not. But we're dealing with a very difficult period in this time with technology, where no matter how clear, loud, and proud you are, not only have you got a lot of propaganda out there, but it can be very specific in the way it erodes clarity, it muffles the volume, and it makes you ashamed of things you should be proud of. And I think that's just really, really difficult. So that's one of the things that we have to learn to combat. But I don't think being clear, loud, and proud, I mean, it's great and it's good, but is it enough? Is it going to help us win?
And there is a challenge, I think, Jonas, I mean, given the work you've done on looking at technology and dictatorship, I'd love for you to speak about disinformation and the role that, all of these kind of obstructions you have for the clear, loud, and proud, as Jesus put it so well. All of these challenges and battles that you have with technology, again, muddying the message with disinformation and trolling and all of this.
Yep. I mean, I kind of have two answers on this from different perspectives. I mean, mostly I'm a literary writer. And as a literary writer, I would say what I try to do is to write in a language which differs from the language from propaganda and social media as much as it's possible. I write complicated books with long sentences and not a very it's a quiet voice when I'm writing, and it takes time to read it, and it's just the idea to keep a certain type of language in an extreme and maybe, if it's possible, also in a new form, open for discourse. But that's obviously something which takes place in a really small bubble. It's preaching the choir, because the people who read my books, they are probably politically thinking more or less the same like me. What was my second point?
Oh, I was asking about the role of disinformation as a challenge.
I mean, I think we have to react much stronger from the political side when it comes to regulation. That's actually the strongest tool we have in democracies, is regulate things. And that, for example, that all the digital platforms are not considered normal publishing houses by following the rules of publishing books or stuff like this, is kind of absurd. It's kind of absurd that you can keep completely anonymity in, and I mean, in certain countries, that's the difficult part about it. In certain countries, it's good that you can be anonymous in the internet. But in democracies, if you talk about politics in public, and social media is a form of public, you have to stand to it by your name. And we can regulate a lot. I mean, is it Australia or New Zealand? I think Australia just banned social media for kids below 16.
Under
I think.
16.
Yeah, under 16. That's a start. I mean, now in Germany, Switzerland, we're discussing at least keeping smartphones out of schools, which is actually a no-brainer. And I think we have to trust the instruments we have as democracies with regulation, and we really have to apply them much, much stronger than we did before. Which is kind of difficult now, because if we try to regulate Silicon Valley companies, it will lead to a trade war. So probably we have to really work on like European platforms like European Google and stuff like this, and we definitely need European large language model and things like this. We have to kind of get independent from those companies as far as we can.
But that's why Europe is an enemy for them, because we have been regulating this. And but when I was talking about speaking out loud and clear and proud, we have to do that after the action. We have to be proud of an action we take. And then, for example, in Spain, I have a government now. We have a government which we could be proud of what they're doing, because they're fighting for equality and they're fighting for liberty. So how can't I be proud of the fight for liberty and equality? A previous action of liberty and equality makes me talk about it and speak out loud, very clear, loud and proud. But there has to be a previous action, not what they call in modern politics this kind of narrative thing without the action previous. It's like, are we going to do something because this is like this? No, this is a lie, and this is the beginning of the fake news thing, which is terrible. We have to fight whenever comes a politician that goes, there are narratives that say, no, you're trying to tell me a lie. Tell me your action, not your narrative. I want to hear your action. What did you do? What do you do? And then you tell me.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to turn to a slightly different question about the role of wealth and influence and billionaires, especially when you look at the Trump administration and you look at the significance and the influence that Elon Musk had last year before he and Trump sort of parted ways. That's a source of unelected power. And we've seen that, whether it's in technology, whether it's any number, mineral rights, a lot of wealth, a lot of billionaires. exerting influence and power from behind, and the manifestation of which I think was Elon Musk with his Department of Government Efficiency, to have a government body without any elected power or being part of, anything really. It's just one man thinking that he can change. And similar with Peter Thiel, I think, who still operates from the shadows. So Jonas, why don't you start on that? Like, where do I start?
It's such a difficult topic. I mean, it's obviously that with democracy there comes a promise of a certain equality, and this promise is broken, of course. So I think what we have to revive is the idea of class war. It's an old term, and it's a powerful term, but it's a term in Europe you can't use it almost. It's like a burned term. But just one social democratic politician, a minister actually, tried to use it. She used it once recently, and she was really bashed for it. But I think that's actually what we have to become loud about. I think it's a war against certain classes, and they are winning big time, the upper classes, and we have to name that really clearly. And I think maybe in France there is kind of a discussion much more present than in other countries. They also have Zuckman, a young economist who has some ideas about how to change that with taxes mostly. I mean, it's kind of the same answer I gave to the last question. It's regulation, it's taxation. That's what we have to do. But how can we bring people back to the idea that that is the way to go? Because too many people believe the neoliberal narrative of trickle down. Still, it's scientifically proven that it's just not true, and you can just look around and
right.
Trickle down is just a myth.
10 minutes.
But too many people are still believing it, and I'm not sure. I think the way to persuade them is actually really to talk about class and wars between classes. It sounds very aggressive or hostile, but it's just the truth.
Very quickly, I've been instructed to open it up for questions and I definitely want to, but Lola, you were about to make a point. Do you want to make it briefly or?
Well, I was just going to say that one of the things that's most dangerous about this kind of power is the fact that it's kind of a digital power. I mean, it's kind of silent. It happens without most people even knowing that it's happening. And when you see how that impacts a country like Nigeria, where the illiteracy rate, the education is generally quite poor, access is poor, it's even more dangerous. Because people don't even understand fully what they're fighting against. And then we haven't even, the conversations around regulation haven't even really started because we're just coming to terms with this brave new world, if you want to call it that.
Correct.
Make a point.
Yes.
Just want to make a point about that. It's a question, again, it's a question of language. As we're going backwards, this fight for this class notion.
Yeah, let's call it not class war. Let's call it class struggle, maybe.
The class struggle was with it never end in the world. It was a European perspective that we had. This middle class thing that we thought that it end, but in the beginning of this century, it came again. It came again. So with this crisis, so we have to recover. We have to talk about this concept again.
So I know we could go on talking, but let's open the floor.
Good morning, man. Good morning, sir. So something which I wanted to ask you was that something I noticed is that many of the far right parties, for instance, the AfD in Germany, as well as the National Rally Party in France, all of them have very charismatic leaders. I don't agree with their politics, but their the way of their talking, how they touch upon the pulse of the common people, that's all we can see for sure. But something I notice is that that type of charismatic leaders are absent in the left or the central spectrum. Why is it that you can always see that more charismatic people are there on the right side of the politics?
I I think it's not really true that they are charismatic in the AfD. They're absolutely non-charismatic people, actually. And I even would say, how is Trump charismatic? He's not. It's another. I think it works different. It's because somebody like Trump is just showing them that behaving wrongly and behaving bad is okay. If he says, grab them by the, you know what is my little everyday misogynist behavior then when the president says that? If the president says it's stupid to pay taxes, only stupid people pay taxes, what is then my, little black market thing and not paying taxes there and here? All those things, He is rude, he behaves badly, he curses on journalists. So if the leader is doing it, it's a big relief. Then you can do it. Obama, he was kind of, look at him, he was educated and he was nice with his wife and he has beautiful daughters, and it's like horrible for some people. It's like then,
giving permission
yeah.
to give into your basest
And
instincts.
actually, the guy who invented this was Berlusconi in Italy. He was like behaving really badly, doing big parties with young girls, and everybody wanted to be like him. It was like a dream.
Yeah, that takes us to Italy again. In the 30s, they invented fascism with Mussolini, charismatical thing, and then Berlusconi reinvented in this era the same. It's an invention. So, and we have Meloni in power. She's quite charismatic, I can say. But in the other ways, I don't think they are charismatic because in Spain we have Abascal. This is Abascal type, which is not.
Hold on, sorry to cut in, but I know there was someone else who had a question. Yeah.
Since we're talking about democracy being used as a cover for authoritarian regimes, we can see in the US that Trump is using emergency powers to bypass Congress to annex or invade territories like Venezuela. Do we still consider the US to be the primary embodiment of democracy, or can we agree that the US has become a kakistocratic, totalitarian, and imperialist regime?
I think we can agree.
Yes.
Of course. They're on the path of fascism. Fascism, call it fascism. Not that thing you said. You said, well, what did you say? Like imperialism, yeah. Yeah, that's good as well. Yeah.
Thank you for this wonderful session. So my question is, when see a country like Sri Lanka, so I saw the Tamil library of Sri Lanka being burnt down during the war by the fascist government. So across the world, the fascists have managed to sell this idea of their idea very cleverly through media. Even the US, for the past decades, have sold the idea of war and how the third world nations need saving through media to the people who voted for democracy. But when we see our writers, even you mentioned that you write complicated books, and do you think our writers need to change the approach of dissent to avoid the books being banned or our literature being banned, or at least to communicate easily to the masses?
They always used it. I mean, the fascists always said, look, Goebbels, Mussolini was a journalist. So it's in their nature to use the media or the message. For them, the narrative is essential because they want to point at a narrative which is completely opposite to reality. So when they call, for example, this immigrant problem in Europe, we don't have a problem with immigrants. indeed, it's a solution, but they call it problem. It's not a problem. It's a solution. That and they impose these narratives through media because they know. I don't want to call it media. It's propaganda, and they use it, the social network, like for an instrument, a tool for their propaganda, not a proper space to discuss things.
Yeah, Lola, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just thinking of two things. The first is that, and I say this from the perspective of a writer, it's very difficult to dictate to creative people how they should express their creativity. But also in the context of dissent, in the context of activism, all writing is dangerous to an individual who is power drunk or who has autocratic tendencies. So it's not just the difficult ones, it's all of them.
Reductionist
No.
attitude, right? To simplify, to take out nuance, to leave no room.
I would say, as writers, we have to change into different roles. When I'm writing novels as a literary writer, I don't care about being approachable or writing for the masses or everything. I want to write simply in a literary idea. It can be as difficult as possible. I don't care if anybody is going to read it. But when I write essays, it's something completely different. I use a completely different language. I want to make a point. I want to have an argument. I want to win the argument. When I write literature, I never want to make a point. It's nothing logical. It's nothing political. It is political, but not in the same sense. It's like I open my toolbox and I take out a completely different tool if I write an essay, a different language. And it's even a completely different language when I start being an activist.
I think they're telling us that our time is up. Yeah.
Okay. So if I organize a rally or a demonstration, I have to write, like a pamphlet, and I have to say, "Come to the rally because we are fighting against this and this." It's a completely different language again, and that's something we have to think about when we're writers.
All right. Well, I think that's all we have time for. But of course, these awesome panelists are around if you want to talk to them later. And thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you so much, ma'am. With this, we are winding up the session.